Elderly black woman assaulted by police in her own home, but her son's powerful response shocked the whole country. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Eastwood, Alabama, the kind of day where the birds chirped louder than the traffic. 67-year-old Martha Jenkins sat by her window, sipping coffee from her favorite chipped mug. She wasn't a rich woman, just rich in years and stories. A retired school teacher with a soft voice and a strong spine. Her neighbors knew her as the sweet lady with the garden full of sunflowers and hummingbirds. That morning she was tending to her porch plants when she heard a loud knock at her door. Not a polite tap, but the kind that comes with urgency. Or aggression. Startled, Martha wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door. On the other side stood two uniformed police officers, both young, white, and visibly tense. "Are you Martha Jenkins?" one asked, already glancing around her home. Martha nodded slowly. "We need to come in," the other said, his tone more like a command than a request. She hesitated. "May I ask what this is about?" But she never got an answer, because what happened next would shake her. Whirlwind echo across the country. Without waiting for permission, the taller officer pushed the door open and stepped inside. The second followed close behind. Martha stumbled, backward, confused and frightened. "I haven't done anything," she said, her voice shaking. "We're investigating a warrant linked to this address," one said vaguely. But they didn't explain further. It didn't show a warrant either. Martha's living room, once a place of warmth and comfort, suddenly felt invaded. One officer walked toward her hallway, peeking into rooms, while the other stood guard over her. Martha reached for her phone on the coffee table. "Don't touch that," the officer snapped, slapping her hand away. She winced in pain. "You can't be in here like this," she whispered. But they weren't listening. One officer pulled open drawers. The other dumped a shoebox onto the floor. They were searching, but for what? They weren't saying then. The first officer grabbed her by the arm tight enough to bruise and shoved her into a chair. "Stay here." She sat frozen, breathing hard. A woman who had never broken the law was being treated like a criminal in her own home, and she didn't know it yet. But her son was about to get a call that would change everything, miles away. In a small tech startup office in Atlanta, Darnell Jenkins was deep into code. His phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. He ignored it. Then it rang again. Then again. Something told him to pick up. "This is Darnell," he said. The voice on the other end was panicked. It was Martha's neighbor, Ms. Elaine. "Darnell, it's your mama. The police are in her house." He pushed in. She looked scared. "It's Darnell." Stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Wait, what?" "What do you mean they pushed in? She didn't let him in. He just walked in. They're tossing her house like she's some drug dealer or something." "Darnell," they laid hands on her. His heart dropped. Not his mother. Not Martha Jenkins. "Call 911, he told Elaine. "I'm on my way." He grabbed his car keys and bolted. His hands were shaking, his mind racing. He didn't know exactly what he'd find when he got there. But one thing was clear. They had picked the wrong woman. And the wrong son. Darnell's car tore down the highway like it had something to prove. He didn't care about speed limits or traffic or time. All he could think about was his mother, his sweet, kind, church-going mother being roughed up by people in uniform. He was angry, but beneath the anger was fear. Not just for her safety, but for what he knew about how these things sometimes ended. Martha Jenkins wasn't just his mother. She was his world. Raised him alone. Put him through college. Worked 3 jobs just so he could write code and build his own name. And now some strangers thought they could just storm into her home and treat her like garbage. Called her phone. No answer. He called again. Straight to voicemail. His stomach turned. "Please be okay, Mama," he whispered to himself. "Please be okay." As he pulled into her street, he could already see the police cruisers. One parked halfway on the lawn. Small group of neighbors stood across the street whispering, recording. And there, in the middle of it all, was his Mother, sitting on her porch, alone, shaken but alive. Darnell jumped out of the car and ran up the lawn. "Mama!" he shouted. Martha looked up, tears in her eyes, but she still smiled when she saw him. "Darnell," she said softly. He knelt beside her, gently took her hand. "What happened?" Before she could answer, one of the officers approached. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back." Darnell stood up slowly. Taller than the cop, calmer than expected, but his eyes burned. "I'm her son." "And you're going to tell me why the hell you're in her house?" The officer tried to puff up. "This is an active investigation." "Into what?" "You kicked in an elderly woman's door and assaulted her with no warrant." "There was probable cause," the officer said flatly. "Then show it," Darnell replied. "Show the paperwork." But the officer didn't have anything to show, and the camera phones across the street were now aimed squarely at him. This wasn't just a neighborhood incident anymore. It was a moment, a spotlight, a reckoning, and Darnell. He knew how to use the light. Darnell helped his mother into the house, past the mess, past the broken drawer, and the spilled memories. She sat on the couch, breathing slow, while he recorded everything, every corner, every shelf turned over, every bruise on her. Risty didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't even cry. Instead, he opened his laptop. Right there, on the coffee table, his fingers flew across the keys. Emails to news outlets, attachments to civil rights lawyers, posts on social media with pictures and video. Within minutes, hashtags started spreading. Within an hour, calls started coming in. By nightfall, a firestorm was brewing. The same internet that gave Darnell his career was now his sword. "Mama," he said gently, "they're going to regret this." But Martha shook her head slowly. "I don't want revenge. I want truth. I want justice. That's all." Darnell nodded. "Then that's exactly what we'll get." Outside, the cops were still trying to explain themselves. Inside, a mother and son were about to start something bigger than either of them imagined. And the city. The city wasn't ready. Darnell uploaded a photo of his mother's bruised wrist. Next to her knocked-over bookshelf, no screaming, no hashtags, just the caption, "This is what police did to my 67-year-old mother today." No warrant, no explanation, just force. He hit post and sat back. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then a like, a share, a comment, then 50. Then hundreds. By the time the sun set, the tweet had gone viral. People across the country were retweeting it. Activists, lawyers, celebrities, local news picked up the story first, then national. The mayor's office called the police chief. The chief called the officers. And suddenly, the story started changing. Now the cops were claiming they believed the address was connected to a drug ring. No drugs found, no suspects inside. Just a 67-year-old woman with a sunflower apron and a swollen wrist. But the public wasn't buying the excuse, because they'd seen this story before, just never quite like this. By the next morning, reporters were knocking on Martha's door. Cameras, microphones, vans. Some came respectfully, some didn't. "Martha, do you want to make a statement? Did the officers apologize? Are you planning to sue?" Darnell opened the door, calm but firm. "No interviews right now. She needs rest." Inside, Martha watched from the window. "Darnell," she said softly, "this wasn't supposed to happen. I know, Mama, but now that it has, we're not hiding from it." He took a deep breath. "Do you trust me to speak for you?" She looked at him, her son, who used to stutter, who stayed up late studying, who always held her hand when crossing the street. "I trust you with my life," she said. That afternoon, Darnell sat down in front of a webcam. No studio, no makeup. Just him, a plain shirt, and the truth. He spoke clearly, with emotion, with facts, with purpose. He didn't rant. He didn't scream. He told America what it felt like to get a phone call that your elderly mother was being assaulted by the people. sworn to protect her. And America listened down at Eastwood Police Headquarters. Things were unraveling. Fast at the officers involved were put on administrative leave, a fancy way of saying, go home until people stop looking. The department issued a statement, calling it a misunderstanding and unfortunate procedural mistake. But the public wasn't having it. Marches began forming. Peaceful ones. Mothers holding signs that said, that could have been me. Young people chanting Martha's name. Local pastors stepping to the mic. Every news segment started with the same phrase. The assault of Martha Jenkins and her son's explosive response has sparked national outrage. But this wasn't about outrage anymore. This was about change. And Darnell, he wasn't done. He started organizing, calling lawyers, setting up meetings with city officials, building a case, brick by brick. And somewhere along the way, the cops realized something chilling. They hadn't just messed with someone's mother. They had kicked down the door of a movement. While the world was watching, Darnell kept working behind the scenes. He didn't want just outrage. He wanted proof, receipts, accountability. He filed a formal request for body cam footage. Police tried to delay, saying it was under review. But with public pressure mounting, the footage was released, and it was worse than anyone imagined. The video showed the officers approaching with hostility, entering without consent, ignoring Martha's repeated pleas. Her voice was calm then. Scared, one officer shoved her. Another laughed. The footage aired on national news that night. It played on every screen, from bus stops to break rooms. People weren't just angry. They were heartbroken. She's someone's mother, one anchor said, nearly in tears. She's all of our mothers. Online, the comments poured in. Fire them, jail them, enough is enough. And for the first time, the department began to feel the heat. The mayor ordered an independent review. Civil rights groups got involved. Petitions gathered thousands of signatures in hours. The story was no longer just about, oh no, Martha. It was about every unseen story just like hers. A few days later, Eastwood Police Department held a press conference. The police chief stood stiffly behind a podium, reading from a prepared statement. We regret the events that took place at Ms. Jenkins' residence. The officers involved have been suspended pending investigation. We take this seriously. But nowhere in that statement were the words sorry or we were wrong. Wasn't an apology, was a PR move. And people knew it. Outside, protesters stood silently, holding up signs that simply said, say her name, Martha Jenkins. Darnell stood with them, arms crossed, not shouting, not moving, just present. When a reporter asked him how he felt about the department's statement, he answered plainly, that wasn't accountability, that was damage control. He wasn't done, not even close, because he'd already filed a civil lawsuit, because he'd already talked to the DOJ, because he knew how the system tried to wait people out. But this time, he wasn't going anywhere. For a while, Martha stayed quiet. Not because she didn't have words, but because she didn't want to speak in anger. But now, she was ready. Sitting at her kitchen table, in front of a single camera, she looked directly into the lens and said, my name is Martha Jenkins. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a threat. I'm a grandmother, a retired teacher. I raised a son who believed in this country. And last week, this country told me I didn't belong in my own home. She paused, collected herself. I don't want revenge. I want responsibility. I want respect. I want other mothers not to be afraid to answer the door. The video was short, quiet, powerful, and in just a few hours. It reached millions, not because it was loud, but because it was real. And suddenly, even those who usually looked away couldn't anymore. 2 weeks after the incident, everything changed. The Department of Justice officially opened a civil rights investigation into the Eastwood Police Department, not just for what happened to Martha, but for a pattern. A long, dusty trail of complaints that had been ignored. Suddenly, old cases were being pulled. Stories came out. A teenage boy harassed at a gas station. A pregnant woman handcuffed during a traffic stop. An entire neighborhood over-policed and under-protected. It had been going on for years, and now, with Martha's story in the national spotlight, the cracks in the system were starting to show. Inside the department, officers were whispering. Some angry, some scared. They knew this wasn't just about two cops anymore. It was about the culture they'd all been part of. And the silence they'd chosen to keep. One officer anonymously emailed Darnell, "I'm sorry, I saw the footage. There that day, but I've seen things like it before. You're doing the right thing. Keep going. It wasn't justice. Not yet, but it was a start." Darnell never planned to be an activist. He liked building things, not fighting things. He was a coder, a problem solver, a quiet mind in a loud world. But something had shifted in him. Maybe it was watching his mother's hands tremble. Maybe it was hearing her say, "I was so scared." Maybe it was the way the system tried to gaslight her, tried to make her doubt her own reality. Whatever it was, Darnell found his voice. He spoke on panels. He helped draft policy. He started a community tech nonprofit that tracked police accountability in real time. People began calling him the son who wouldn't sit down, and he wore that name proudly. But through it all, he never lost focus. "This isn't about me," he kept saying. "This is about a woman who was assaulted in her own home and walked through it with dignity." And that dignity was contagious. Then came a twist no one saw coming. The two officers who assaulted Martha, officers Trent Walker and Brian Casey, were officially charged. Assault, civil rights violations, abuse of power. They were arrested quietly, but the news hit loud for the first time in Eastwood's history. Active duty officers were being prosecuted for brutality against a civilian. The department tried to distance itself. "These men do not represent our values." But the public didn't forget how long it took them to say anything at all. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Inside, the officers looked stunned. This wasn't supposed to happen to them. They thought the badge would protect them. But this time, the cameras kept rolling, and the people kept watching. Justice, slow and stubborn, finally started moving. And in the front row of that courtroom sat Martha Jenkins, dressed in a soft blue blouse, hands folded, head held high, because she was no longer just a victim. She was the reason they were there. The courtroom was cold, to clean, the kind of place where truth and technicality wrestle in silence. Martha sat beside Darnell, soft scarf wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't want to be there, but she knew she had to. The officers sat across the room, no longer in uniform. Just two men in suits, faces stiff. The prosecutor spoke first. These men violated the Fourth Amendment, and they violated basic human decency. The defense tried to spin it. They believed the home was connected to a suspect. They were doing their job. But the body cam footage told its own story. So did the bruises. So did Martha's voice. She took the stand, calm, poised. No tears, just truth. "I wasn't a threat. Was watering my plants." The room went still. No coughs, no whispers. Just her voice echoing. And when she stepped down, even the court clerk wiped her eyes. Truth had entered the record, and everyone felt it. The jury was out for 2 days. It's 2 long, quiet days. Outside the courthouse, the crowd grew, not angry, just present. Holding space. Holding breath. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, you could hear a pin drop. On the charge of unlawful entry. Guilty. On the charge of assault. Guilty. On the charge of violating civil rights. Guilty. 3 words. Repeated heavy. Final dot. Martha didn't flinch. She didn't cheer. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The officers looked stunned. One of them dropped his head into his hands. But for the first time, justice didn't hide. It stood loud, clear, in front of the whole world. Darnell hugged his mother. "Tight. It's over," he whispered. But she shook her head. "No, baby, it's just beginning." A few weeks later, the mayor of Eastwood stood in front of City Hall. She announced a full audit of the police department. Body cams now mandatory. Warrant procedures rewritten. A civilian. Oversight board created and chaired by Martha Jenkins. The woman they tried to silence was now writing the policies. When reporters asked how it felt, Martha just smiled gently. It feels necessary. As for Darnell, he turned his nonprofit into a full foundation. Training young coders. Teaching them how to build systems that watch the system. Martha's story inspired more than headlines. Sparked books, a documentary, even laws introduced in other states. But she didn't care about all that. What mattered to her was the silence that finally broke, and the people who were finally seen. Because what happened at her door wasn't just an accident. It was a reflection. And now, because she stood up, it had become a mirror the country could no longer look away from. The letters started arriving slowly. A card here, a folded note there. Then boxes, hundreds of letters, packages, handwritten prayers, all addressed to Martha Jenkins, the woman who stood tall. Some were from elderly women like her. Others from young people who had never met her but saw themselves in her story. One card read, "My mother went through something similar. She never spoke about it, but you spoke for her." Another came from a 12-year-old girl in Chicago. "You made me brave." Martha kept them all. Every single one. She sat each morning with a cup of tea, opening a few at a time. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she just sat in silence. Hand over her heart. It wasn't fame she felt, it was connection. Proof that even when justice is late, still matters. That one voice can ripple across 1,000 others, and a door kicked in could still open something powerful. 6 months after the trial, a major network aired a sit-down interview with Martha and Darnell. It wasn't flashy. No makeup lights, just a living room, a couch, and two people who had been through fire together. The interviewer leaned in. "Martha, do you forgive the officers?" There was a long pause. Martha looked down at her hands, then up again. "I forgive. Because I don't want to carry their actions any longer. But that doesn't mean I forget. Forgiveness is for my peace, not their excuse." The room went quiet. Darnell added, "They thought she was small. They thought they could scare her. But my mother stood up, so now the country can't sit down." It was raw, unscripted, real. The interview aired on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, it was the #1 trending video in the country. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was the truth, said simply. And truth, when told with love, can't be ignored. Back in Eastwood, things looked different. The neighbors who once whispered from porches now organized potlucks and town halls. A mural of Martha was painted on the community center wall. Not just her face, but a doorway behind her, half open, light pouring through. It said in bold, "Careful letters, you are seen." The police started showing up differently. More respect, more community engagement. Not perfect, but progress even. The kids felt it. They rode their bikes past Martha's house and waved every time. She'd wave back, smile soft. Sometimes invite them in for cookies, like she always had. Because in the end, Martha never asked to be a symbol. She just wanted to be safe, to be seen. But life had made her more, and she carried that weight with grace. Because sometimes the strongest revolutions begin not with fists, but with dignity, and a voice that says, "No more." A year passed. Seasons came and went, but Eastwood remembered. On the anniversary of the incident, the community held a gathering at the park down the street from Martha's house. Not a protest, celebration, music, barbecue, laughter. Families brought lawn chairs, kids drew chalk outlines of flowers and peace signs on the pavement. And in the center of it all was Martha, sitting under a canopy surrounded by neighbors who once only nodded politely but now knew her name. Darnell stood up to speak, not from a stage, just on the grass, microphone in hand. "1 year ago, they broke into my mother's house. He said. But they didn't just kick in a door, they opened a movement. Applause, cheers, some tears, because everyone knew the story wasn't just about injustice. It was about what comes next. And for the first time in a long time, Eastwood felt whole. That night, Martha sat at her kitchen table, writing a letter, not to a mayor, not to the press, to her future great-granddaughter, the one she hadn't met yet. She wrote, "They came into my home thinking I was weak, but weakness doesn't raise sons like Darnell. And dignity doesn't bruise easy." She folded the letter neatly, placed it in a small box along with clippings from the case, a copy of the mural photo, and the first card she received that said, "You made me brave." She sealed the box and labeled it, "For when she asks who I was." Because someday a child would grow up in a world slightly better than this one. And maybe, just maybe, that child would walk through doors their ancestors had to fight to open. And when they asked why, they'd know where to begin. Martha Jenkins didn't want to be famous. She didn't ask for the spotlight. But when history came to her door, she answered it with calm, with courage, with clarity. She reminded a nation that power unchecked is dangerous, but people united are unstoppable. And her son, Darnell, didn't just defend his mother. He defended every mother who's ever been told to sit down, be quiet, and take it. He showed the world what it looks like when tech meets truth, when silence meets purpose, and when love becomes action. Their story is now studied in classrooms, referenced in legislation, spoken in places where once voices went unheard. But most importantly, it lives in the quiet bravery of people who now know if Martha could stand up, so can they. Because sometimes the most powerful protest isn't loud. It's a whisper that refuses to die, a door that doesn't stay broken, a woman who says, I will be seen." This wasn't just one family's fight. It became a moment the whole country had to face. If Martha's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share this video. Keep the conversation going. And if you want more powerful American stories that need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more truth to tell. Till next time, stay aware, stay human, and take care.